Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Well, one thing we need to realize that life is full of changes. It is what it is. Things are going to change. Situations are going to change. Sometimes it's going to upend you like you're walking on some carpet and somebody goes and you go flying and you have to recover. The time it takes you to recover really says a lot about you and whether you have something called adjustment disorder, adjusting to a situation, a new situation, reacting to it. How do you get back on track? How long should it take for all of that? He is somebody that helps people all the time with that as a psychologist, hypnotherapist, and so much more. Dr. Roger Lavine is back with us. Hey, Roger, how are you?
I'm great. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning. It's good to have you back along with us to talk about this because it's the baseline for life. We need to, and I'm speaking from experience. If it was maybe 5 years ago and things happened, I would get just like, what is going on? It would really throw me. Now I've learned to understand that things are going to happen and they'll work themselves out and I have to work through them. The adjustment disorder that we talk about, is that truly a disorder that people deal with?
Well, clinically, what defines an adjustment disorder beyond just having a difficulty with, a change is when it's either the response is excessive or it creates dysfunction. And I would say creates dysfunction is more of the issue than excessive emotional response. For example, if somebody gets a head injury and now they're not as sharp as they used to be, they have memory problems, maybe they can't keep their job and they have to readjust their whole life to this head injury, how do they go about doing that? Right? It's a bigger than life problem. Or instead of just one death in the family, you have three deaths in a family within a very short time span. How do you deal with that much grief? So lots of times life can throw us not just a curveball, but something we're totally not prepared by life to be able to handle. And that's usually when people have an adjustment disorder.
It like you're reading my mind because that happened to me. I was 21 and I had two uncles and my father pass away a few months apart in 1 year. And they all worked at the same place, coincident or not. I don't know. I look back and it's almost like it's blocked out in my memory. I'm just bringing this up because you mentioned about 3 deaths in a row. I'm sure it impacted my life even today that I don't even know about. Maybe through hypnotherapy, I would discover that. But when somebody deals with something happens, and you say that it upends their life to a point where maybe they're not sleeping, maybe not eating properly, all of that. That's also what we're talking about here too, right?
Exactly. Because if you're not sleeping, you're not going to function well, right? In
Right.
relationships.
Sure. Yeah. And you can't process, you can't deal with it. And what if something else comes along while you're dealing with this? Now you have something else. Anything can happen. Then you have to deal with that without sleep, which is almost impossible. How do we get to the point where the adjustment is easier when something crops up? How do you get into that mindset? Or is it even possible to work on something like that?
Well, yes, there's certain skills required to handle a big change, right? What we call resilience. And one of those, the ability to have that mental flexibility is something we have to learn. For example, uh, we may know pretty well we're not good at letting go. So, say in my job, the reason I do well is because I'm tenacious and I really hold on to things and I uh, charge right through it. Well, that same skill, if I have to accept a death or a big change, could work against me. So now I
Hmm.
got to learn the skill of not holding on, but how to let go.
Where do you even start with that, Roger? Obviously, that's something that I'm going to believe based on my history and just others that you can't do that alone. You have to work with somebody on that. Where does that work begin to let go?
Well, the work begins in terms of really understanding your relationship to whatever it is you're holding on. What happens is with us is we have a life experience, um, and that's fine. But if we have repeated life experience, then we learn something. So let's take something like uh, being an accountant. I go to school and I'm learning accounting. I'm a person who does accounting, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then over time, I start thinking of myself as an accountant. That's who I am, right? And I identify with being an accountant. I look like accountant. I act like an accountant. When I go to a party, they say, "Who are you?" I'm an accountant, right? Then say I get in an accident and I get injured in a way, a head injury or something that I can no longer be an accountant. Now that I've identified with it, it's much harder to let go.
Mm-hmm.
So now I have a relationship with something that's far more than just something that feeds the family, right? So it's a process of an understanding that without my permission, without even thinking about it over time, I've created this relationship with being an accountant that's very hard for me to let go of. So I need help to understand even that that has happened, right? And then how do I come up with a new identity? Because if I can't be an accountant anymore, who am I and what am I become
Mm-hmm.
the questions, right? And these are questions we don't really examine very often. For example, if you had throat cancer and all of a sudden your voice changed,
Mm-hmm.
it would be a huge task for you to identify, who am I? Because I'm sure with that lovely voice of yours, you just have so identified this is who I am.
I'm not going to disagree, Roger. It's, and I've been doing this since I was 17. And after 26 years, I left and I started working at a big radio station when I was 17. I left and it was a whoa, okay. And it was a mutual departure, but it was what's now? What am I doing now? And I pivoted in different directions, but I came back to doing what I was doing. But yeah, we get connected to these things. It could be the same exact thing. You're in a relationship, a marriage with somebody. Everybody looks at you guys. You are the couple, right? You get the kids, you get the house. It's all great. Then that ends. Now what? That was your identity. What are you now? Do we need to think about that in life in general? Just start thinking about that we're we're more than what we think we are in terms of those roles, because you're right, we get stuck in those spots as our identity, how we identify.
Absolutely. I think, and this is part of our life journey. Uh, what happens when we're, say, in our mid 20s, and we talked a little bit about this before, is in your mid 20s, you should
Hmm.
start examining how am I living my life? Where did this all come from? Because we all get conditioned without our permission as we grow up. And part of maturing is really questioning our values and what we've identified with and how we're handling our relationships and those kinds of things. And uh, we hear so much about midlife crisis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe they're not a crisis. Maybe at midlife, people start examining things and they start reshifting, or they have a heart attack and all of a sudden they realize that even if you win the rat race, you're still a rat.
Right, right. Maybe it's not a midlife crisis, maybe it's a midlife adjustment. Maybe you look at it that
Exactly.
way, right?
Absolutely. A course correction, usually.
Yeah, yeah. There's a song that resonates in my mind. I don't know if you remember. It came out in the 80s, Once in a Lifetime by the Talking Heads.
Hmm.
And to me, it's kind of like, if you look at the lyrics, I'm just going to paraphrase a little bit here. You may find yourself behind the wheel of a large automobile. You may find yourself in a beautiful house with a beautiful wife. And you may ask yourself, well, how did I get here?
Hmm.
It's kind of like you turn around and later in the song, um, you tell yourself, it says, and you tell yourself, where is that large automobile? This is not my beautiful house. And you may tell yourself, this is not my beautiful wife. Basically, it wasn't you, but the water, and that's a reference to the song. The water is always moving. I take that as change. It's underneath you. It's always flowing, and you got to be flowing with the water because all these things that you identify with, they might not be you. These are things that we attach to.
Yeah. So one of the first things that we need to do when we have these awful things we perceive to be awful, this adversity in our life, is change that frame of reference that this may be the best thing in my life. To become open to the notion that, hey, this probably happened for a reason.
Hmm. Yeah.
And it may, the new life that happens afterwards most likely will be one I choose rather than one that was chosen for me.
Or you may think you chose this situation in life in the beginning, but then because of relationships, it may have pivoted into something that's really not you. It just kind of went that way, right?
Yeah, unless you've really examined your choices, which most of us don't do quite
No.
when we're young, we're totally unaware of how much we're influenced by our social group, our family, society in general. It's not until we get a little maturity and some distance that we can actually make some of those choices a little more freely and with knowledge of ourselves.
So on point there, Roger, because we really don't know ourselves in our 20s. However, in our 20s, we're kind of charting the course, the direction that we're heading in. But, when you're younger, you think, I'm invincible. I don't have to worry about it. I can lean on my mom or dad, whatever it might be in the beginning. But some things change after that. I want to go back in your situation, and you've shared with us you experience a major accident on a boat. We've talked about that. Where in your life were you when that happened? Were you already practicing what you're doing now, or was that even before that?
I was probably on my fourth career. One of the things is I have ADHD, and one of the interesting things about having ADHD is that you're not risk adverse. So by that time, I'd already had a military career. I was a captain in the Army. I had had a finance career. I was director of finance for a large computer industry company. I had a consulting career, and I was actually at that time owned a software company. So for
Wow.
me, making these big life changes was kind of part of the norm for what I would do in my life.
You're lucky in that sense. Yeah, a lot of us, sometimes not in that situation. So you were used to change in that regard.
Right. Yes.
Would you say, based on learning different principles and also where you are now in your career, that you're better equipped when major things happen that can be life changing, whatever they may be, that you deal with them in a much better way than maybe you did way back in the past?
Well, one of the things about that boat accident was one of the consistent things, and through all of those experiences was I was the smart guy in the room.
How do you
I
mean?
was I was always very intelligent and quick and could come up with the solutions and the answers. Whether I was, I rapidly rose in the military. I got promotions quickly in corporate America, and as a consultant, they pay you for speed. But when I had my boat explosion, I got a head injury, and I was very slow at processing and had a lot of issues with my mental capacity.
Uh,
So my identity as being the smart guy was completely shattered. Right? I
hmm.
wasn't the guy that came up with the answers. I wasn't the guy that people would follow because I just wasn't sharp, you know. And so I had to really question that whole identity that I had that was based around that interaction with people. You know, it was the one thing that was consistent in all those jobs.
Gotcha.
And we find that most of us have those kinds of things.
So you were able to pivot quickly in a situation, but ever since the explosion or thereafter, shortly thereafter, things had changed. Have you gotten back to, the speed and making decisions and things like that since then?
It took 10 years, but it took about 95 to get to about 95% of what I had before.
Wow.
Um, but it took 2 years for me to redefine myself, go through the process of really seeing what other attributes I had and how could I
Wow.
take advantage of them. And it comes with the tantamount anxiety and depression and all those things that I needed support to go through that
Sure.
adjustment
Oh,
process.
but such a such a major thing to go through in all different areas. All through it though, did you have a thought in your mind that it's going to be okay? I got this. It's going to be all right. I don't know how long it's going to take, where we're going to go with that, but did you have that faith in yourself or that hope that it was going to work itself out?
Uh, Probably not. I think it took that 2 years before, and that's probably where the pivot came in 2 years was to get to that point where I could say I'm going to be okay, and it'll take however long it'll take.
Hmm.
Because when you're not in that mode of I'll be okay, then nothing happens fast enough. You're looking for answers faster so you can be comfortable enough to make it through the day.
What's your advice for somebody that either has trouble adjusting or just reacts very quickly to something in turmoil, where maybe other people may say, "All right, yeah, that's okay. Yeah, calm down. It's going to be okay. I got this." What's your advice to somebody like that?
Well, to start out, by understanding that don't keep doing this the same thing that doesn't work. For example, most people are become pretty good problem solvers, right? You go through life, they kind of analyze the situation, they come up with good solutions, and they get into these situations where they keep trying to problem solve and they just add to their frustration because like accepting a death or changing your identity, these aren't problems to be solved, right? They're experiences you go through, they're emotional processes, and quite often those emotional processes need quite a bit of support. Hopefully we get that from family, friends, and faith, but sometimes we need some professional help as well to get through those processes. But don't think reasoning is going to get you there just because it worked on your last business problem.
Right. Yeah. And I think it really goes back to one word, and we said it at the beginning: adjustment. What is that? When you look at that word, if you define that word, what does it really mean? There's sometimes you have to give up a little here to get there. Things need to be adjusted. It's not going to be, a quick change. It's going to be a process. And I think we all need to understand and realize that.
And quite often it means you have to learn new skills. Now, some of those may be new occupational skills, but they may be new emotional coping skills, right? New ways of dealing with stress and change. So invariably, if life is presenting you something new, you're going to have to learn something new to be able to handle it. And using what you've always done is probably not going to get you there.
That is probably one of the most important things I've heard in a very long time. And we should repeat that. So give us that again, learning something new.
Well, if we're presented with a new situation, right, we we have to accept we need to learn new skills. It may be a new occupational skill or a new social skill or a new emotional skill to cope. But we shouldn't be hard on ourselves that we don't have the tool set that we need for
Hmm.
this new situation, because in most of these cases, these are situations that aren't normal day-to-day coping situations, whether it's an illness or an injury or a big loss or those kinds of life events that are just overwhelming.
It makes so much sense. Let's say that you work in carpentry or or do some kind of handiwork, and now you have to cut 45-degree angles and you don't have the saw to do it or the tools. It's something brand new. Somebody just said, "Yeah, I want to do a bay window, but I got to make angles here." Something brand new you're dealing with. You have to have the tools to do it. Kind of the same thing that I'm getting here. So, and that, I think that gives us uh, a permission pass in some regards to like, okay, it's okay. You don't have what you need here to deal with it. So where's the tool going to come from? Talking with somebody, learning something, maybe meditating for the first time. Maybe that's going to work, or talking with somebody like yourself to help you deal with that because you don't know how to deal with it. Something new.
Yeah, in most cases, what you want to do is start with somebody who's been through a similar thing successfully. That's why some of these grief groups are uh, so powerful, because somebody's just one step in the process ahead of you can give you some way of coping with things that you might not know. Or if you ask a friend who's never been through that kind of situation, they probably don't know either.
No,
Or or you may need to go get professional help. But I think what happens with most people is we have this uh, fearless self-sufficiency, right? And alone, these things tend to be overwhelming, and we don't have the skills to actually work our way through it.
I believe also it's our society, our culture, where a lot of times we don't ask for help when we should, or even if somebody doesn't have anybody to go get something to eat or watch a movie, many of us won't go alone because we don't want people judging us. Oh, look at Jim. He can't find anybody to go to the movies with. No,
Mhm.
maybe that's your choice. Maybe that's
Right.
okay. But I think we're kind of brought up that way where it's, not reaching out so much. And to your point, your friends can support you, family can support you, but if they haven't dealt with things like that or know how to, they're not going to. I mean, you have, and even just I had no idea that you've been through that many different careers. Um, in my mind, accident, you suffered the accident and got through that, and then you're doing what you're doing now. I had no idea that all that was part of your life, which is very impactful. You went through a lot of other changes as well.
Well, it's certainly helpful when I have uh, a executive show up. I can help them
Sure.
with that change. I was a single parent, so if someone loses their spouse, I can help them adapt to that change of being a single parent, those kinds of things.
Yep. Totally got you there. I am one myself. So I understand. Um, and you also, I find it interesting and impactful and gives more perspective on who you work with, dealing with professional athletes. Now we're all not professional athletes, but what their mindset is in terms of what can happen, in terms of anxiety and all of that. That's just another aspect of what you do, right?
Yes, but part of that is one of the things I didn't mention is I also did some professional race car driving as well,
Wow.
in the professional driving training for like the State Department and those kinds of things.
Is there something you haven't done, Roger?
That was one of the jokes in my occupation was, Roger's got a story for everything.
It's like there's a jack of all trades, there's a Roger of all trades. But it seems to me that you found your calling in terms of helping people as you are now.
Well, I think all these adventures and misadventures in life were all gifts given to me to be able to help people in similar, uh, who've
Yeah.
gone through similar things, and give them a little bit of a guide, right?
Yeah.
Whether you're a professional athlete dealing with the competitive pressures, in how to better yourself from the neck up, right? Or whether it's somebody who had a head injury and going through the years of cognitive rehabilitation to get your mental stuff back, or somebody going through a divorce and having to deal with single parenting. It's called
Mhm.
life. And again, you want to go to somebody who has the experience.
Well, I look at it this way. Those things that you dealt with are your tools to helping people deal with them.
Exactly.
Best way to reach you is your name on your website, right?
Correct. Dr. Lavine, DoctorLavine, drlavine.com.
Gotcha. Levine, I always say Lavine. Levine is which is proper.
My dad pronounced it Lavine, but no one will find my website with Lavine. So better I say Lavine so they know how it's spelled.
Gotcha. And it is clear that way. And I've never heard it said Levine. A lot of people I know have the E, the two E's, and not the A, but easy to find. Doctor, spell out Doctor, LAVINE.com. Roger, always great talking with you. I truly, truly appreciate your honesty and transparency in your life, because those stories help the rest of us. And if somebody's going through some major changes, adjustments, whatever, start the conversation with Roger. It's a free consult, right?
Correct.
Excellent. Roger, thanks for being here. And I'm looking forward next time we talk.
Take care.
Thank you.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.